In this tale, Ethan, a simple veterinarian, becomes caught in the middle of a dangerous conspiracy when he saves a mysterious creature named Zara, a creature with far more significance than he could ever imagine. But this story isn't just about Zara. It's about Ethan's unexpected connection with Lady Seraphina, a royal who is on the run, determined to reclaim her throne. As they navigate through a galaxy full of danger and enemies, their bond grows stronger. But can love truly survive in the chaos that surrounds them? Welcome to Galactic Conundrums, the place where the greatest mysteries of the universe come to life. Milky Way. What if everything you thought you knew about aliens, UFOs, and interstellar politics was just the surface of something far more complex? Today, we're diving into a mind-blowing story that combines mystery, adventure, and a romance that defies the stars. Like, share, and subscribe to follow their journey. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what will happen next. Will Ethan and Seraphina's bond grow into something deeper, or will the universe tear them apart? Don't miss this thrilling adventure where loyalty, love, and danger collide in the vastness of space. Stay tuned. In the cold, metallic corridors of Nexus 7, a forgotten space station nestled far from the bustling galactic trade routes, Ethan moved quietly, his footsteps echoing through the silence. The hum of the station's systems was the only sound that dared break the stillness, a constant reminder of how remote and isolated this place was. The station was a patchwork of old, rusting metal and harsh, sterile lights, built for function, not comfort. Here, on this distant outpost, Ethan served as the sole veterinarian, and though he had encountered countless species in his 7 years, nothing had prepared him for the discovery he was about to make. As he passed an emergency airlock, something caught his eye. A strange, almost ghostly shape lay crumpled in the shadows. At first glance, it looked like a tangle of fur and twisted limbs, but as Ethan approached, his breath caught in his throat. The creature's fur was matted with dark crimson, and its body was bruised and battered. It lay motionless, its breathing shallow and labored, a soft rasp against the cold air of the station. Ethan's heart raced, his instincts kicking in. He knelt beside the creature, his hands trembling slightly as he gently touched its side. The fur was unlike anything he had ever seen, white and silver stripes running along its body, shimmering faintly in the dim light, like the lines of a long-forgotten constellation in the night sky. The animal was large, powerful, but there was an undeniable intelligence in its eyes, even in its weakened state. With a low, almost sorrowful growl, the creature stirred, its amber eyes flickering open, meeting his gaze with a fierce intensity. It was as though it understood exactly what he was doing, and in that moment, Ethan realized just how extraordinary this being was. It wasn't just a creature, it was something more, alive with an awareness that defied the boundaries of what he thought was possible. Ignoring the sharp claws that seemed to dig deeper into his arms as he lifted it, Ethan carefully cradled the injured creature. He felt the weight of its gaze, heavy and watchful, as though it was silently assessing him, even in its weakened state. Blood dripped from his fingertips, staining the creature's fur with its crimson streaks as he made his way through the labyrinthine corridors of the station. Every step felt like a journey into the unknown, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this discovery, was meant to be. The service lift groaned, its old machinery protesting as it carried them down to level 3, where his clinic lay nestled between the forgotten cargo bays and the dusty storage units. The stench of metal and antiseptic filled the air, familiar to Ethan but somehow more suffocating than usual. The clinic itself was a stark, sterile room, dimly lit and filled with the hum of equipment that had seen better days. The walls were lined with shelves of medical supplies, some outdated, others barely functional. Yet here, in this makeshift sanctuary, Ethan had saved many lives, most of them mundane, others extraordinary in their own way. But this creature, it was different. As he laid the creature on the examination table, Ethan's mind raced. What was this thing? What kind of creature had he just discovered? The station's xenobiology database couldn't even begin to make sense of it. The scan results flickered on the screen, showing only the closest match, a Lady sapiens ascension species from the far-off Sinus quadrant. But this animal, it wasn't humanoid. It was something else, something far more primal, yet with an intelligence that lingered just beneath the surface. Ethan couldn't fathom it. This was no ordinary animal. It was something far more mysterious, and the question hung in the air: who, or what, would send such a creature to a remote station like Nexus 7, wounded and alone? In the sterile, dim-lit examination room, Ethan stood over the creature, still lying unconscious on the medical table. The soft, rhythmic hum of the scanners filled the air, its blue light flickering across the creature's body like a subtle pulse. As Ethan leaned in, his eyes tracing the alien creature's unique features, he couldn't help but be amazed by the intricate design of its form. The xenobiology scanner beeped, its holographic readout projecting a three-dimensional image of the creature's internal structure above it. Ethan's breath caught. The creature's body was far more complex than any non-sentient animal he had encountered before. He could see multiple hearts, beating in unison yet distinct, each located at strategic points along its torso. The rhythmic thrum was unlike anything he had ever studied. The creature's skeletal structure was reinforced, far more solid than any terrestrial animal, suggesting an immense strength and resilience. It was as though its very bones had been crafted to endure unimaginable pressure. The deeper Ethan looked, the more puzzling it became. Neural pathways lit up on the scan, intricate and sophisticated, unlike the simple networks seen in most non-sentient creatures. This creature had intelligence, a depth of cognition that went beyond mere instinct. His fingers hovered over the touch panel, his curiosity piqued. The system's analysis began to repeat its previous findings, flashing the same result: Lady sapiens, a sentient species known for their power and intellect. But this animal, this was no humanoid. It was an enigma. It was a being of great intelligence, yet undeniably animalistic in form. The shock of the discovery caused Ethan to pause, stepping back for a moment, as he tried to comprehend the inconceivable. He was dealing with something far beyond the boundaries of what he thought he knew. The scanner hummed softly, its blue light bathing the creature in an eerie glow as Ethan begins applying regenerative gel to the creature's wounds. His hands trembled slightly, as he carefully worked on the delicate task of healing the animal's deepest cuts, each wound eerily precise, almost surgical. He felt an odd sensation, like a pulse and echo coming from the creature, a faint whisper of something other, something alien. It was as if the creature was aware of his actions, not in the simple way animals sense touch, but with an intelligence that communicated something deeper. The sensation was unsettling. As Ethan leaned closer, his fingers brushing against the creature's fur, something changed. The animal's body shifted beneath him, its muscles contracting sharply. A sharp intake of breath broke the quiet as the creature's amber eyes snapped open, a flash of vivid recognition in its gaze. The room was thick with tension as those eyes locked onto his, and for a split second, Ethan could see nothing but the intensity in those glowing orbs. It wasn't the wild, feral gaze of an animal. This was different. Then, it happened. With a sudden, violent motion, the creature sprang, its claws extending, striking Ethan's arm with a strength that made him wince in pain. The creature hissed, its fangs bared, a low, guttural sound filling the room. Ethan stumbled back, a sharp exhale escaping him as he narrowly avoided the animal's vicious strike. His heart raced, but his mind remained focused, steady. "Easy," Ethan murmured, his voice low and calm. He had seen this before. Animals in pain could be unpredictable, especially those with higher intelligence. He reached for a sedative, his movements slow, deliberate, as not to startle the creature further. The syringe clicked softly as he filled it, and within moments, he carefully injected the creature, just enough to ease its pain and bring it back from the edge of panic. As the sedative took effect, the creature's body relaxed, its muscles loosening. The tension in the room started to dissipate. Ethan kept his voice calm, speaking softly, the words almost feeling like a ritual. "I'm here to help you." The creature's eyes, still wild and intense, slowly blinked. It didn't close them completely, though. No, it studied Ethan. It observed him. There was something almost sentient in that gaze, something that hinted at a complex intelligence behind those amber eyes. Ethan felt the oddest sensation. It was as if the creature was trying to communicate with him. A subtle, invisible thread seemed to pull at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this bond was more than just chance. It was something deeper. He reached out tentatively, his hand hovering just above the creature's fur. When his fingers brushed against its side again, a soft, static jolt ran up his arm, a faint pulse of electricity, a shock that made him pull back instinctively. What was happening? The creature's fur crackled lightly with an energy that seemed to hum beneath its skin. Was this communication? Or something else entirely? The thought lingered, but before Ethan could contemplate it further, the creature's body stilled completely, its breathing slow and deep, almost rhythmic now. It had fallen into a peaceful state of unconsciousness, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had just begun. The room was quiet once again, save for the soft hum of the medical equipment and the creature's steady breath. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, a feeling of unease settling over him. This was no ordinary animal. It was something much more, something connected to forces beyond his comprehension. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought echoed. He had just become part of a mystery far larger than anything he had ever imagined. The sharp chime of Ethan's COMM unit broke the stillness of the clinic, its sound cutting through the quiet like a knife. He glanced at the screen, momentarily startled by the urgency in the message. The text blinked across the display, emergency docking request. Diplomatic vessel Crimson Claw requesting clearance for immediate port entry. Authorization required. Ethan's fingers hovered over the controls, a brief pause as he processed the request. Diplomatic vessels were a rarity, especially on Nexus 7. This station was so far out in the depths of space, far removed from the bustling galactic lanes that it rarely saw any high-ranking ships. In his 7 years of service, this was the first time a diplomatic ship had asked for emergency docking. And with that request came an unsettling thought. Something was off. His eyes shifted to the creature lying motionless on the examination table. Zara. It had been nearly an hour since he'd sedated her, and she remained in a peaceful, almost trance-like state. Yet even in this calm, her body seemed to react in subtle ways. Her ears twitched slightly as the sound of the COMM chime echoed in the room. Her tail twitched involuntarily, and a soft, almost imperceptible growl rumbled deep within her chest. Ethan frowned, a prick sensation creeping up his spine. There was something about this vessel, the Crimson Claw, that seemed to affect Zara. His instincts, honed over years of practice, told him that the two were connected somehow. It wasn't just a noise that disturbed her, it was as though she could sense the arrival of the ship, as if it triggered something deep within her. But what? Who would want to bring such a ship so close to a place like Nexus 7, especially after Zara had been so badly wounded? The longer he stood there, watching Zara's subtle movements, the more his suspicions grew. He had saved this creature, but he felt there was a deeper connection between her and the events unfolding now. The mysterious injuries. The strange, almost otherworldly bond he'd felt the moment he touched her. And now, this diplomatic vessel. It all seemed too much to be coincidental. Ethan shook his head, his thoughts racing as his fingers resumed their task of tending to Zara's wounds. But his mind wandered, caught in a tide of unanswered questions. Who were these people? And why was Zara, of all creatures, so intimately tied to a vessel like the Crimson Claw? What was the significance of the ship's arrival? He couldn't help but feel that the situation was quickly slipping out of his control. But there was little time to think about it now. Zara needed his care. He had no answers yet, only instincts urging him to keep her safe. Still, the unease lingered. The screen flickered once more, breaking Ethan from his reverie, as another message flashed across the display: security protocols elevated to level 2. All non-essential personnel must remain in designated areas. Ethan felt a sense of foreboding settle deeper into his bones as he stood in a sterile, quiet room. The lights above hummed with an eerie intensity, and he caught the faintest tremor in the creature's movements as though she could sense the threat looming. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken, as if the very fabric of the station was responding to the presence of this mysterious vessel. His hand hovered once again over the control panel, a faint hesitation. Then, he began to type in his response, but he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening now, whatever the Crimson Claw was bringing, was much bigger than a simple medical crisis. The walls of his clinic felt a little tighter, and the hum of the station's machinery, normally a comfort, now sounded distant, like the beat of an ancient drum heralding something unknown. As he glanced once more at Zara, a thought nagged at him. This was just the beginning. The Crimson Claw loomed above Nexus 7 like a dark shadow, its sleek, imposing silhouette cutting through the station's cold, dim light. The hum of the station's engines seemed to falter in the presence of the massive diplomatic ship, and the air around it felt heavier, charged with something intangible, something that spoke of distant power. As it slowly docked, Ethan couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that filled the room. The name Crimson Claw echoed in his mind, and it seemed to carry with it a warning and omen of things to come. The doors to the docking bay hissed open, and Lady Seraphina stepped through, her presence filling the room before she was even fully visible. Her eyes, a striking amber that mirrored Zara's, scanned the space with an authority that was both commanding and serene. The space around her seemed to bend to her will, as though the very atmosphere recognized her as something not entirely human, something otherworldly. She moved gracefully, every step deliberate and measured, her figure draped in the elegant attire of her station. Her fur, a silken blend of silver and white, shimmered faintly as she passed beneath the cold lights of Nexus 7, a soft, almost ethereal glow clinging to her form. The lines of her features were sharp, but they held an unmistakable feline elegance, a blend of strength and beauty that commanded attention. As she walked into the clinic, the heavy silence seemed to follow her, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Zara stirred slightly in the recovery chamber, her amber eyes flickering open as if sensing her master's presence. The air shifted once again, a current of recognition between the two beings. Zara's head lifted slightly, her body tensing, as if caught between two worlds. She growled softly, but there was no malice in the sound, only recognition, as though calling out to the one who had shared her soul for so long. Lady Seraphina's gaze immediately locked with Ethan's, and in that instant, time seemed to stretch, their eyes meeting with an intensity neither of them had expected. An invisible thread stretched between them, unseen yet undeniably real, like a deep, unspoken connection that they both felt but couldn't explain. There was something about this moment, something ancient, that both drew them together and held them apart. "You're the one who saved her, aren't you?" Lady Seraphina's voice was melodic, almost hypnotic, carrying with it the weight of untold years, of unspoken knowledge. It was a voice that felt familiar, though Ethan had never heard it before. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to steady his racing pulse, unsure of how to respond. He had never felt this drawn to someone not like this. There was something otherworldly in the way she spoke, as though every word carried a deeper meaning, something hidden beneath the surface. "She's not just an animal," Lady Seraphina continued, her gaze never leaving Ethan's. Her eyes softened as she looked at Zara, who was now sitting up in the recovery chamber, her body tense but her eyes locked onto her mistress. "She is my companion. Zara is part of my soul." The words hung in the air between them, weighty, as though they carried more than just the meaning of simple friendship or loyalty. A bond existed between Lady Seraphina and Zara that went beyond the physical realm, a connection forged in the deepest recesses of their beings, an unbreakable link that tied them together, mind and spirit. Ethan's heart beat faster as he absorbed her words, the weight of the truth settling over him. This was no ordinary animal. Zara was not merely a pet. She was something far more sacred, more significant. She was a reflection of Lady Seraphina herself, her companion in the truest sense of the word, an extension of her very essence. "I don't understand," Ethan began, his voice soft, as if he were afraid to break the fragile spell that seemed to be cast over them both. "How is that possible? How can a creature be a part of your soul?" Lady Seraphina's gaze softened, a knowing glint in her eyes. "We are not so different, Zara and I." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts, her eyes flicking briefly to the creature that lay before her. "In my people's culture, companions are more than just pets. They are part of our essence, our spiritual balance. Without them, we are incomplete." She stepped closer to the examination table, and for the first time, Ethan saw her expression shift, becoming vulnerable, almost wistful. "Zara was not always like this. She has been with me since the beginning, long before I became who I am now. She is my protector, my confidant, my connection to the world beyond the physical. We share a bond that transcends space, time, and even life itself." As Lady Seraphina spoke, Ethan could almost feel the weight of her words, the truth they carried. There was an ancient power in the way she described her relationship with Zara, an understanding that made his own connection to the world seem small in comparison. This was more than a bond of affection, it was a connection forged by the stars, by something older than time itself. Zara, hearing her mistress's words, stood from the table, her movements slow but purposeful. She stepped toward Lady Seraphina, her amber eyes locked onto hers, and there, in the quiet of the clinic, their souls seemed to speak without words, an exchange that only they could understand. Ethan watched in awe, feeling as though he had just stumbled upon a secret he was never meant to know, a truth so ancient, so deeply woven into the fabric of the universe that it was beyond his comprehension. But as he looked at Lady Seraphina and Zara, he knew one thing for certain: he had just become entangled in something much larger than himself, something that was destined to change everything. Lady Seraphina stood still for a moment, her amber eyes fixed on Zara, who lay nestled on the examination table, her fur still slightly matted with the remnants of her wounds. The air in the room was thick with tension, as though the very walls of the clinic were listening, waiting for what was to come. Seraphina's gaze softened, but there was an undeniable hardness in her voice when she finally spoke, breaking the silence. Zara is not just a companion. She is my soulmate in every sense of the word. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of something far heavier. Without her, I am not complete. We share more than a bond of flesh and blood. We share a spiritual connection that transcends the physical world. She paused, the hint of a frown darkening her features as she stepped closer to Zara, her eyes flickering with something darker. The injury she suffered, the energy weapon that was used on her, was not a random attack. It was deliberate. Someone wanted her to die slowly, painfully. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine at her words. The subtle shift in the atmosphere around them was palpable. The quiet in the room deepened, and his own heartbeat quickened as he tried to process the gravity of what she was saying. This wasn't just an animal being harmed. This was an assault on a royal bond, on something sacred. Lady Seraphina's voice grew colder, and the air around her seemed to thicken with a dangerous intensity. Zara is more than a mere creature. She is a symbol of my family, of our legacy. Whoever did this meant to strike at me, to weaken the house of fittest sapiens. She let out a breath, her hands clenched at her sides. They sought to break the soul of my family by targeting Zara. It was no accident. It's part of a greater conspiracy, a political move by those who want to see me fall. Ethan swallowed hard, the full scope of the situation dawning on him. He had known Zara was special, but he hadn't realized just how deep the connection between her and Lady Seraphina ran. This wasn't just a wounded animal in need of care, this was an act of war, an attempt to sever the heart of a royal bloodline. And in that moment, he understood. He had become entangled in something much darker than he could have imagined. The clinic, once a place of healing, now felt like a sacred battleground. Ethan's mind raced, the implications swirling around him. Who would dare to attack a royal companion like Zara? And why? What kind of people were behind this attack? And what did they hope to gain? Lady Seraphina's voice broke through his thoughts, but there was a hint of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior now. My enemies are closer than you think, Dr. Hayes. They have been watching me, tracking my every move. Zara's injury is just the beginning of a much larger plan. They will stop at nothing to destroy me and take my throne. Ethan could feel the weight of her words, the raw desperation that seeped through despite her calm demeanor. He had seen people in desperate situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just fear for oneself, it was fear for everything she had fought for, everything she was. As Seraphina turned her gaze back to Zara, the bond between them seemed to pulse in the air, a silent connection that spoke volumes. If they think they can break me by hurting Zara, they are gravely mistaken. But I need help, Dr. Hayes. I cannot do this alone. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he met her gaze. He had never expected to find himself in this position, caught up in the politics of a distant royal family, forced into a battle that had little to do with him and yet felt incredibly personal. But as he looked at Zara lying so helpless on the table, her eyes now half closed, but still alert, he knew he couldn't turn his back on them. There was a connection now, something that bound him to these two beings in ways he couldn't yet explain. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said quietly, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. "I'll help you protect Zara. I'll help you fight this." Seraphina's eyes softened, a fleeting look of gratitude crossing her features. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the sharp resolve that had become her trademark. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous, that the enemies lurking in the shadows were relentless and powerful. But with Ethan's help, perhaps they stood a chance. Ethan could feel the weight of the decision settle over him like a heavy cloak, but it was a weight he was ready to bear. He had entered this situation as a simple veterinarian, but now, he found himself standing beside a royal, a ruler who was more than just flesh and blood, a ruler who was a soul entwined with a companion as ancient as the stars themselves. The quiet of the clinic deepened again, but this time, it was no longer peaceful. The storm was coming, and they were at the eye of it. The soft hum of the station was shattered by a sudden explosive crash. The door to Ethan's clinic buckled violently under the weight of a force far greater than anything the station's old security systems could have anticipated. Shattered glass littered the floor, reflecting the dim light of the clinic like jagged stars in a dark sky. A figure emerged from the smoke and debris, a shadow, long and lethal, moving with terrifying precision. Before Ethan could react, the room was filled with a sharp, cold clang of combat boots striking the metal floor. More figures followed, silhouettes dressed in sleek, black armor, their movements swift and coordinated, as though they had been trained for this moment. Their weapons gleamed in the faint light, designed to kill with a single strike. They didn't speak, just the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of their energy weapons filled the silence. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the first assassin lunged toward him, energy blade flashing in the dim light. The suddenness of the attack left him momentarily stunned, but instinct kicked in. His hands moved rapidly, grabbing the nearest medical tool, and before the assassin could land the first blow, Ethan sprayed a burst of sedative from a canister designed for large predators. The thick mist filled the air, and the assassin's movements slowed, his body faltering as the sedative worked its way into his system. The assassin's weapon clattered to the floor as his body slumped, unconscious. But there was no time to relax. More attackers were closing in. One of them was already advancing on Lady Seraphina, who had barely reacted before the assassin grabbed her by the arm. Her amber eyes flashed with panic, but she fought back, her movements fluid, trained, but she was still recovering from the earlier attack. Her strength was not enough to overpower her assailant. With a feral growl, Zara, still weakened from her injuries, shot up from her place on the examination table. Her amber eyes, wild and protective, flared with the same intensity that had held Ethan in their grasp earlier. She moved with unnatural grace, her claws extending as she launched herself at the assailant. In one swift motion, Zara's claws raked across the attacker's armor, forcing him to stagger back, a screech of metal filling the room. She was badly wounded, but her bond to Lady Seraphina was enough to awaken a strength Ethan had never witnessed. Zara wasn't just defending her mistress, she was protecting her very soul. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing as the attackers swarmed him from every direction. The clinic was no longer a place of healing, it had become a battleground. His instincts screamed at him to protect Lady Seraphina and Zara, but he couldn't do it alone. A second assassin lunged toward him, but Ethan was ready. His hands moved with surgical precision, grabbing a medical tool, a long, metal needle filled with a strong sedative. He jabbed it into the attacker's neck, the sedative rushing into his system. The assassin staggered and crumpled, the weapon in his hands falling uselessly to the floor. But there were still more to deal with, and Lady Seraphina was at risk. The fight was chaotic, the clinic now a storm of flying bodies, flashing blades, and the hiss of tranquilizers filling the air. Ethan darted between attackers, using his knowledge of anatomy to incapacitate them without killing, aiming for pressure points, weak spots. The medical tools at his disposal were designed for healing, but today, they were his weapons of survival. Lady Seraphina, though injured, fought fiercely, her movements graceful but desperate. She had always been a ruler, but now she was something else, something more primal, more fierce, as she slashed with her own weapon, her eyes glowing with rage and fear for Zara. But the attackers were relentless. One of them managed to strike Lady Seraphina's side, the weapon slicing through her side with a sickening hiss. Blood pooled quickly around her, staining the floor beneath her. Ethan saw the wound and his stomach churned. She crumpled to the ground with a sharp intake of breath, her hand pressed to the wound in an effort to stem the bleeding. "No!" Ethan shouted, rushing to her side. His hands were shaky, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed a regenerative gel pack and pressed it against the wound, watching as the gel began to work, slowly knitting the torn tissue together. The wound was deep, but the gel would buy them some time. He looked up briefly to see Zara fighting off another assassin, her body moving with speed and grace, her claws slashing with deadly precision. The two of them were an unstoppable force, Lady Seraphina, fierce and determined, and Zara, loyal and unyielding. But Ethan couldn't ignore the danger. He had to act fast. "Stay with me, Lady Seraphina," Ethan muttered as he continued to apply the gel, his hands trembling. The bleeding slowed, but she was still pale, and her breath was ragged. The final assassin advanced toward them, his eyes narrowed, focusing on Zara, who was clearly wounded but undeterred. Ethan couldn't let them take her, he couldn't let them take anyone. He reached for a medical stun grenade in a drawer near the counter and hurled it towards the advancing attacker. The explosion of blue light and electric energy sent the assassin flying back, his body twitching uncontrollably as the stun grenade did its work. He collapsed, unconscious, and the room fell silent for a moment, the ringing in Ethan's ears deafening. Breathing heavily, Ethan looked around at the chaos. The attackers were either unconscious or retreating, leaving only the sound of their heavy footsteps as they disappeared. The fight was over for now, but the danger was far from gone. He knelt beside Lady Seraphina, who was still conscious, though pale, and struggling to stay alert. Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and something else, an acknowledgement of the depth of the bond they now shared. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were already on the next move. The danger hadn't passed, it had only just begun. And now, they were more vulnerable than ever. The clinic was a war zone: shattered glass, overturned medical equipment, and the faint scent of burning fuel and disinfectant hung in the air. Ethan stood over Lady Seraphina, his breath heavy, his hands still trembling from the fight. Despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins, a quiet understanding settled between them. The immediate danger had passed, but the real threat still loomed much darker, much closer than they had imagined. Lady Seraphina's blood-streaked hand rested on the table as she slowly sat up, her face pale but determined. She looked at Ethan, her amber eyes sharp, yet there was something more, a sense of resolve. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice low, but there was a commanding edge to it that made Ethan realize the magnitude of her words. "I need to leave Nexus 7. I need to return home." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the stories of the fittest sapiens, the royal families who controlled vast stretches of space. But he hadn't realized just how deeply Lady Seraphina was entrenched in this conflict until now. She wasn't just a ruler in hiding, she was a queen without a throne, fighting to reclaim what was rightfully hers. He had sensed her strength earlier, but this revelation changed everything. "You're saying you want to go back and reclaim your throne?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lady Seraphina's lips tightened, a flash of pain crossing her face, but only for a moment. "Yes. My enemies believe they have won. They think they've broken me. But they're wrong. I will not let them take everything from me." Ethan stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. The weight of the decision that hung between them was enormous. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for a legacy, for a future that had been torn away from her by forces she could barely control. His eyes flickered to Zara, who was curled up in the corner, her golden eyes still alert, watching the two of them with that same intensity he had seen before. The bond between Lady Seraphina and her companion was unspoken, but it was tangible in the air, a connection stronger than any words could describe. Ethan felt a strange, growing sense of duty well up inside him. He wasn't just a veterinarian anymore, he was part of something much larger. He had healed Zara, but in doing so, he had also become entwined in a struggle that was not just about power or politics, but about survival, loyalty, and a battle to reclaim what was lost. "I'll go with you," Ethan said suddenly, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of his decision. "I'll help you. I've seen what's at stake here. This isn't just about Zara. This is about you, your fight, your people. I'll stand by you." Lady Seraphina's gaze softened. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that spoke of a quiet gratitude, something deeper than just the gratitude she had expressed in their earlier conversations. "You don't know what this will cost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if you are truly willing to help me, then I'll need you more than you know." Ethan nodded, his decision made. He wasn't a ruler or a warrior, he was just a man who had been thrown into a storm far larger than he could have ever imagined. Yet, there was something compelling about Lady Seraphina, something that stirred a deep respect in him. Her strength wasn't just in her title, it was in the determination in her eyes, in the fire that refused to be snuffed out by her enemies. As the moments passed, a subtle shift occurred between them. The tension that had filled the air earlier, the danger that had been present, began to recede, replaced by a different kind of energy, something softer, yet more powerful. The bond between Ethan and Lady Seraphina was no longer just one of necessity. It was becoming something more, a connection forged in fire. As they stood in the wreckage of the clinic, their shared purpose grew stronger. They weren't just allies anymore, they were beginning to understand each other in a way that words couldn't explain. Ethan couldn't ignore the underlying pull he felt toward her. The closeness between them wasn't just the result of the dangers they had faced, it was something deeper, something they couldn't quite put into words. He found himself drawn to her strength, to her resilience. There was a quiet admiration in his gaze that spoke volumes, even without words. Lady Seraphina, too, felt a change. She had always been surrounded by the political games of her people, hidden behind layers of formality and duty. But with Ethan, there was no pretense. There was no mask. It was just two people, standing on the precipice of something neither of them could yet fully understand. And yet, there was a quiet certainty between them. They would face whatever came next together. With one final glance at Zara, Lady Seraphina turned back to Ethan. "We need to leave immediately. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes." Ethan gave a small nod. It was clear now. There was no turning back. The hum of the small rescue shuttle was the only sound that filled the cabin as it shot away from Nexus 7. Ethan sat near the cockpit, his fingers gripping the cool metal of the seat, his mind racing. Lady Seraphina stood beside him, her figure sharp and defined even in the low light of the shuttle's interior. Her face was a mask of determination, though her amber eyes betrayed a weariness that matched his own. Zara, curled on the floor at their feet, was still recovering, her breathing deep and steady, though her sharp gaze never strayed far from her mistress. Outside the viewport, Nexus 7 grew smaller, a dying star fading into the endless expanse of space. The station, once their refuge, was now a symbol of the past, a place that had tethered them to a world now consumed by danger. But the journey they embarked on now would take them to uncharted territory, where nothing was certain, and the future was as unclear as the blackness outside the shuttle's glass. The shuttle's engine rumbled, its thrusters firing in short bursts as they navigated away from the station. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made. They were fugitives, not just from the dangers of the station, but from a larger battle that stretched across the stars, one that Lady Seraphina had been born into, and one that now entangled Ethan more deeply than he ever could have imagined. "We're heading to a safe house on Luma Prime, a remote moon," Lady Seraphina said, her voice low, though steady. There was no fear in her tone, only certainty. "It's as secure as it gets, for now. But don't be fooled, Dr. Hayes. The storm is far from over." She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes gleaming with a quiet, unwavering strength. "The real fight is just beginning." Ethan nodded, his thoughts clouded. He had been a simple veterinarian only days ago, nothing more than a caretaker for the creatures aboard the station. Now, he was entangled in the political maelstrom of Lady Seraphina's world, and he knew that, for better or worse, his path was tied to hers. He wasn't just an outsider anymore, he was deeply involved in the struggle for survival, and for power. His eyes drifted to Zara, still lying on the floor, her fur slightly ruffled but her form a reminder of the power and danger that lay just beyond their reach. Zara wasn't just an animal, she was the key, the symbol, the bond that tied Ethan to Seraphina's royal destiny. "We don't know what will happen when we get there," Ethan said quietly, breaking the stillness. His voice carried the weight of the uncertainty that had settled over him since the moment he had agreed to join this journey. "But we can't keep running forever. There's always a risk." Lady Seraphina's gaze never wavered from the view ahead. "We have no choice, Ethan. But you're right. The risk will follow us, no matter where we go. My enemies are watching, waiting. They will come after us. But for now, we have to keep moving." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with a weight of shared understanding. Ethan wasn't just running from their enemies, he was running toward something. Something new. There was a growing sense within him that his life had irrevocably changed, that the decisions he made now would shape not only the fate of Lady Seraphina but his own future. Through the small viewport, the dark void of space stretched infinitely ahead. Luma Prime was just a pinprick of light in the distance, a temporary refuge, a fleeting promise of safety. The shadows of their pursuers were still behind them, and though they had escaped for now, the future was a constant unknown. Ethan glanced at Lady Seraphina, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. He saw not just a ruler, not just a royal figure, but a woman driven by a deep, almost primal need to reclaim her place, to restore a legacy that had been shattered. He had watched her fight with everything she had, seen the bond between her and Zara. The strength she drew from that bond was something he could barely comprehend, but something he respected deeply. The shuttle's course was set, but the road ahead was anything but certain. Ethan had never wanted any part in a galactic war, but now, as he stood alongside Lady Seraphina, he knew he had crossed the line that separated the observer from the participant. "I don't know where this road will take us," Ethan said softly, his voice steady. "But whatever happens, I'll stay by your side." Lady Seraphina looked at him, her gaze softening, her expression revealing something more than just the royal poise she had worn so effortlessly before. There was gratitude there now, and a quiet understanding that ran deeper than words. "I'm glad," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the shuttle's engines. "Because together, we'll make it through this. Together, we stand a chance." The words hung between them, a promise, a vow. The shuttle continued its journey, but the weight of their shared resolve pressed heavily in the air, binding them in a way that neither could have predicted. They didn't know what awaited them on Luma Prime, or what forces would chase them into the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But one thing was certain: they were no longer just survivors. They were fighters, bound by an unspoken pact to face whatever came next, side by side. As the shuttle glided deeper into the unknown, the stars outside became more distant, their light flickering like hope in the vastness of space. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together. As the journey continues, Ethan and Lady Seraphina find themselves on the edge of something much larger than they ever imagined: a destiny intertwined with political power, deep bonds, and an unspoken connection between them that neither can fully understand. Together, they must navigate a universe filled with enemies, secrets, and mysteries beyond their comprehension. But the question remains: can their growing bond withstand the dangers they face? Or will the forces that pursue them tear everything apart? Their love, still in its early stages, is fragile yet undeniable. As the stakes rise higher and the threat grows more dangerous, will Ethan and Seraphina find the strength to protect each other? And what lies ahead for a simple veterinarian and a royal heiress caught between duty, survival, and a heart-pounding connection that could change the fate of the galaxy forever? What do you think will happen next? Will love be their greatest weapon or their downfall? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, theories, and predictions. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in their epic journey. The mystery isn't over yet. Stay tuned for what happens next in the unknown depths of the universe.